Yes.
I do have a question, and it's with regard, I think, something that you wrote in Integral Psychology, and that's that different techniques we're actually finding out now are actually aimed at different areas of the spectrum of consciousness. We might not have known that earlier, but so we might have asked, why does this person come into high subtle and this person
Right.
low subtle? But it's actually different techniques seem aimed at those areas. So how is one to make sense of all these techniques, and how is one to come to one's own integral practice with basically a shopping list, but you don't really want it to be a shopping list, you want it to be authentic.
Right.
So I asked that.
Yeah, it's a real issue, isn't it? And part of the problem, on the one side, the danger is Japanese have a saying, chase two rabbits, catch neither. And so that's the cafeteria model that we have of spirituality. Oh, I'll take a little of that, oh, and a little of that, oh, and some of that, oh, and some of that. And that pretty much guarantees you'll catch none of them. And that's why I was saying earlier that it's still very important, certainly during this whole transition period, and maybe indefinitely, that pick a path. I mean, you really pick a path that feels comfortable to you. Because there's so many things on these paths that have been tried and tested for thousands of years sometimes, that we can't go fiddling with that formula cavalierly. You have to be really careful about it. We just don't know why human beings transform. That really is the bottom line. Eddington once summarized everything that quantum mechanics had told us about subatomic particles. And the quote was, something unknown is doing we don't know what. And that was sort of the summary of modern physics. That was absolutely everything we could tell you about modern physics. That's the similar. It's the same. I gave a quote. I cribbed that one, but what we knew about integral psychology. And I said, nobody knows why anybody does anything. And that's the summary of what we actually know about this. Same is true for transformation. We have no real understanding of how and why that happens. So the best thing, this is the importance of lineage. And obviously you don't want to get a kind of slavish devotion or obsession to a lineage. Right. But you want to be very careful because it's a tried and true way that can transform people. Right now it's like moldy bread that you put on an infection. Now maybe there's an ingredient like penicillin that's actually doing that, but until we find out what the penicillin is, you have to put the whole moldy bread on your leg because we don't know right now. So a lot of the stuff we're doing is silly, bread and gunk. And eventually we hope to find out more about it. The part of the downside of being in this great, exciting, exploratory period where we're moving towards an integral orientation is just that in being introduced to all the different cultures, we're also being introduced to literally thousands of different kinds of techniques for growth and development. Mike Murphy at Esalen, during the early 70s, had a whole group of people that, because all of the growth techniques were coming together from around the world, started a catalog of both general disciplines and the actual specific types of practices that were used to help change people. They stopped at somewhere around 10,000 techniques.
Wow.
So in order to transform, I'd say pick no more than 3,000 and try to work on those. Right now they're all on the table. Right now that's part of the experiment, and what we want to try to do is research that's going to help narrow that down. In the meantime, there are two things that you can only rely on. One is what feels right to you. You have to have an intuitive, it's almost like the discipline talks to you. You feel a deep love of it. You somehow trust it. It's like it's speaking to you. And people generally will have that kind of feeling. And the other thing, the same goes for a spiritual teacher. Generally, if you meet a teacher and there's a real deep attraction, then that's a good sign. And right now, those are almost the only two compasses we have. It's sort of your own intuitive, discriminating awareness and then teachers that you trust. And you really want to watch them and go, is that what I want to be like? And that's just a very, very good test for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you can't try everything. And it's like I was saying earlier, you have to pray as you can, not as you can't. So if you do have an attraction to a certain form of prayer, you can try that. But I wouldn't be concerned about getting on this state or that state or actualizing this capacity or that capacity, but have a base spiritual practice that you do day in and day out and day in and day out. And then you can experiment with others even while you have your base. You know what I'm saying? And I like how the Tibetans, do this because they have so many forms of meditation for so many different purposes.
Right.
It's like a grocery store of practices. And I guess sooner or later the person has to traverse most of them at different stages in their life. Like lucid dreaming, being able to be awake in your dreams so you can affect your karma, or being able to develop the capacity for conscious dying. So that moment is a moment of great awareness, and that you know what you're doing in that moment because so much hinges on it. You know what I'm saying? But I think the other ones that open the heart and the mind and deepen, that's very important. I was saying to you about centering prayer, or the various forms of Christian meditation, that whole practice is a practice of emptying oneself of ego and self, removing obstacles so that there can be space psychologically, spiritually, for the divine and the human to interact. Eckhart put it in one little phrase: for God to get in, the creature's got to get out. You know what I mean? Because the creature's in the way. And
You're the creature.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and all the little commitments of the creature to creature comforts and desires, it's fine. But the removal of the obstacles is a lot of what it's about.
And it's an interesting thing. It's the removal of identity with the obstacles. And
Yeah.
once that identity is gone, those obstacles actually become the expression of your realization. So on the way up, you have to strip attachment to all of them. On the way down, you re-inhabit all of them. But that takes a real clarity of intent, not to remain attached and pretend that you've transcended them, because you're really just addicted to them.
Yeah.
Part of what we try to do at Integral Institute, and I think part of the Integral Impulse increasingly is going to be that, at the very least, we can do a couple of things right now, which is by looking at all of the different practices that we see around the world, and we actually get to a point where we can say, look, these are some of the crucial ingredients that seem to be present in so many of the effective ones, and that can include, for example, almost all of them have some way that might be called cognitive, but cognitive only in the broad sense of meaning consciousness, and that is a way to increasingly reflect on yourself. And we all know that one of the famous summaries of development that Robert Keegan gave at Harvard, and this was looking at developmental psychology, is that the subject of one stage of development becomes the object of the subject of the next stage. And in a sense, you're just sort of being aware of yourself, pushing back farther and farther to that ever-present witness that cannot become an object. And the Christian mystics would say we make stepping stones of our old selves. We die to this self and die to this and die to this until the final death is occurred, and then you have the unborn and undying. And that great death, it represents the complete letting go of any attachment to any of the creaturely components, and a recognition of I amness, that fundamental center in you that is unwavering awareness moment to moment. I am that I am. And so all traditions have some component of that. They all have some component that opens the heart. And so if big mind is that ever-present awareness, big heart is that ever-present love that reaches out and touches everything within this great big mind. And then they all have some form of action. And it's charitable action or bodhisattva action, but it's service as an expression of the fact that you are one with everything that's arising moment to moment. And it's an inconvenience because it's an inconvenience to the creature, but not to God, or not to Godhead. And so that's where it becomes useful to compare, not because you're going to chase these different rabbits, but you're going to make sure that whatever path you're on, you're using the techniques that your path almost certainly has, but you're just going back and making sure you're touching bases with those.